Chat start. Cek 1 2 3 cek tes 1 2 3.
Attention please. To all participants of this guest lecture, the event will soon be commenced. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Nyoman Puspagayatri. I am a student from Biology study program, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Udayana University, and I will be the MC of this event. Good morning and the warmest welcome we extend with our greatest honor to the Dean of Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Udayana University, the Honorable Dr. Anda Niluh Watiniasi, PhD. With our due respect to Dr. Robert Nezi and Dr. Imlal Baral from the Center of International Forestry Research, which is also known as C4. With our due respect to the Vice Dean of Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Udayana University, the Head of Collaboration, Unit of Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Udayana University, the coordinators of Biology program in Bachelor, Master, and Doctoral degree, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Udayana University, and all our respectful participants of this guest lecture, both in this meeting room and the virtual WebEx. Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Namo Buddhaya, may God bless. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the guest lecture of the restoration of degraded landscape in Asia and the Pacific. Challenges, opportunities, and a way forward. Today, Wednesday, 7th of September 2022. This guest lecture is an implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding and the Letter of Intent between Udayana University, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science of Udayana University, and C4. This event will be divided into 3 sections. The first section is the opening, then it's followed by the main session, which is the guest lecture by Dr. Robert Nezi, and the last section is closing. As the opening of this guest lecture is the singing of Indonesia National Anthem, then will follow by prayer. For the audience, please stand up.
Jangan
distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before we step into the main session, let us take a few minutes to pray to the God to ask for His blessing. Pray move begin. Finish. For the audience, you may now take your seat. Up next is the opening and welcoming address by the Dean of Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Udayana University. Please welcome the Honorable Dr. Anda Niluh Watiniasi, PhD.
Thank you, Ms. MC. So, our Honorable Dr. Baru, uh, the head of collaboration unit, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, the head of study program, bachelor, master's, and doctoral degree of biology, study program, biology, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, all distinguished guests in this room, on and in Webex room, who met virtually. Good morning, all. Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, nama budaya, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. So this is a very special morning for today that we're gonna have a guest lecture that we actually waiting for as the collaboration work that we have with the civil aircraft as well as our university and the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences. As stated on that agreement that all collaboration work should be related to our students and the sharing knowledge as well as for research work. Today is the one that we gonna do it. With guest lecture will be presented by Honorable Lecturer Dr. Robert Nasi that will talk about the restoration of the degraded landscape in Asia and in the Pacific, challenge, opportunities, and a way forward. So this lecture would be very important for us to widen our knowledge to what's happening actually in our world about restoration ecology in general. But Dr. Nasi will talk about restoration and of the degraded landscape in Asia and in the Pacific. Maybe later, if the participant has a question, maybe can elaborate the question not only in Asia and in the Pacific, but all over the world. So this is very open, I think, and due respect for Dr. Nancy to widen our knowledge and horizon about degraded landscape. I would say that this guest lecture is presented by Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences and organized by Department of Biology, of Study Program Biology. As I mentioned earlier, that would be very important to our student as well as our lecturer and all academia and all participants that I heard from Dr. Himlan, not only from Udayana University, but from all other area as well. For that, it's gonna be very important for us to join it until at the end of this session. In other time, I would like as well CIFO and ICRAP to elaborate our collaboration not only in research and education, but also in community service base that we might plan to do in terms of international community service. That one program that we would like to approach later. And I already discussed with Dr. Nasi as well of what collaboration, other collaboration work that we might have, particularly for increasing our student experience outside the university, particularly in Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science. This collaboration work might bring us in a goodwill and with future work in very good way. So for Dr. Robert Nasi, your time is very important for us. So thank you for coming, and as well as Dr. Simla, thank you for coming. Hopefully that gonna very useful for us all. That actually bit that I can deliver to you. So for today, on Wednesday, the 7th of September 2022, I officially open this guest lecture that will be presented by Professor Robert Nasi. Thank you. Om Santi, Santi, Santi Om. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, namo budaya, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua.
Thank you, Ibu Dr. Anda Niluhwatiniasi, for your speech. Now we are heading to the main section of this event, the session that will be guided by Dr. Anda Niluh Arpiwi, PhD. Please welcome Ibu Arpiwi. Ibu Niluh Arpiwi is a lecturer and a scientist at Biology Study Program, Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Udayana University Bali, since 1997 up to present time. She obtained her PhD degree from School of Plant Biology, Faculty of Natural and Agricultural Science, the University of Western Australia in 2013. Her PhD research was about morphological, biological, molecular characterization of Pongamia pinnata for production or marginal land. Her research is focused on non-food plant species producing seed oil for biodiesel feedstock, for sustainable bioenergy under environmental stresses, including salinity, waterlogging, and drought. She currently established a Pongamia seedling seeds orchard in Kintamani, aims at producing good quality of seeds and seedling for rehabilitation of degraded lands and coffee shading. So Ibu Arpiwi, time is yours.
Thanks for the Master of Ceremony. Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam nama budaya, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the guest lecture on restoration of degraded landscape in Asia and the Pacific, challenges, opportunities, and a way forward by Dr. Robert Nasi, the General Director of CIFOR, the Center for International Forestry Research. Before we begin, I would like to read his short bibliography. Dr. Robert Nasi was born in Nice, France. He graduated as a forest engineer from the French National Forestry Schools and achieves a PhD in the field of ecology from the University of Paris-Orsay. Since 1982, he has been living and traveling extensively in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, undertaking research activities in the field of ecology and management of tropical forests. He joined CIFOR in August 1999 and held several research and management positions in the organization, such as principal scientist, biodiversity program and management positions, leader and program director. He is, since January the 1st, 2014, the Deputy Director General for Research, and since November the 1st, 2017, the Director General of CIFOR. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Dr. Robert Nasi.
Thank you, Bu Arpini. Dear colleagues, dear Rector of the Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, I'm going to try to show you a little bit of the work that is related to restoration and degradation in Asia and other places. So I'm not sure if I'm going to stand. If I'm not in the middle of the, yeah, should be okay. So on this talk, I'm going to look at the whole issue of land degradation. Why do we need more forests and trees? Because the economic issue related to land restoration, and gives a few examples of things that are happening in Asia and Indonesia. So, if you have seen the IPBES report in 2018, I mean, a sort of their conclusion was that land degradation is really a systemic phenomenon, and it occurs in all parts of the world, and see that it's not something that is limited to the tropical countries, but you have very severely in North America and other places in the world. So it's a recurrent problem all over. It can take many forms. I mean, sort of what is happening is that we don't know exactly how much land is degraded or not. I mean, the value can go from 1 billion hectares to 2-3 billion hectares. The fact that we know it's a big area, it's a large area, it's an area that grows every year. The science between degradation and it has been explained already. Mainly, you can refer to the keynote by Robin Chasdon in 2017. But fundamentally, when you have a forest, like for example, the maple hemlock forest is an example from Canada. If there is no fire, then this forest is stable. Then, when you have a low fire and not a long, quite a long interval between fire, it becomes a white pine forest. And then if you have more fire, it becomes a birch forest. So this all dynamic makes change in state. And what is happening is that you have this area where, because you started from an area, then you end up in what you call a hole. And the deeper the hole, the more stable this situation is. The problem is that very often, this whole issue of degradation is an issue of arrested succession. So instead of following the normal curve, you end up in a hole and you cannot get out of it. And you cannot say that the forest is degraded if it retains this dynamic, that recovery. So if you are in a situation like that, it may not be degraded because the forest has still the capacity to jump and go back to a natural state if it's left without any perturbation. Unfortunately, if you end up in a situation like that, what you call an arrested succession, you need to intervene externally. You need to remove the perturbation, but you need also probably to plant trees. And that's something that is happening in many places. Now, the other question is, you're restoring, yes, but where, how, and for whom? And sort there was a paper plan. This map shows the restoration opportunity area. It was done by WRA in 2014, and it triggered very strong reaction by many people, because fundamentally they looked at any place that is without tree and they say that is a place that you have to restore, and this is not true. There are places that are naturally without trees, and you don't need to add trees to a natural savanna, Minnesota. So the question is, where to restore? And it's more about trees. It's a whole issue of natural ecosystem and natural. And it's also, you are restoring for whom, Minnesota? For the local community, for the people, and and it's very complicated. And so we have to be careful in terms of generalization. Restoration is more than just trees, and it's not only for restoring ecosystem, it's also for restoring communities. If you look at this paper in Nature or Science by Song and al., in fact, we have more trees now than we had 35 years ago. And so the question is that we really need to restore things if we have more trees. Now, if you look at where we have more, it's not very clear, but that's the green value. Yeah, you see, that's the area where we have more trees than we had 35 years ago, but that's the area where we have less. And this is mainly in the tropics, Indonesia, the Congo Basin, and Amazonia. So in fact, there is a sort of two-pronged mechanism. What is happening is that you have a regrowth of forest in the temperate area, mostly, and you have a loss of forest and trees in the tropical area. This was in 2018. With what is happening now, you have millions of hectares going into smoke in northern Russia, and because of climate change. So it's not even true. So probably this conclusion is not true anymore because of what is happening now with climate change. So do we still need restoration? And yes, because we still are losing about 12 million hectares per year of land to degradation, which means that it is harming about 3.2 billion people. About half, a good third of the population of the planet is affected by degradation, and it costs us more than 10% of the GDP. So we're talking about trillions of dollars. I don't know who is familiar with Alice in Wonderland, but in Alice in Wonderland, you have a character which is the Red Queen, and the Red Queen is running, and she's running all the time, but she stays at the same place. And that's what is happening with us with the restoration and degradation agenda. We are all running, but we stay in the same place. So we need to run faster if we want to change something. And why do we need more forest and trees? Because that's the real question. I mean, sort of people will tell you, why need more agricultural land? Because we need to feed 10 billion people, or we need more land because we need to develop infrastructure. So why are we considering that we need more forest and trees? And it's not simply because we are forester. It's also because forests create job and wealth. So it's a big business, $600 billion. It's quite a large number of jobs, direct and indirect. These are only direct jobs, but if you look in the informal sector and all the household, it's a much bigger number. It's important for agriculture, water, energy, and infrastructure. At the same time, forests also have a significant role to play in climate change adaptation and increased resilience. And we see that 80% of the deforestation worldwide is driven by agriculture. So, and these are infographics prepared by the World Bank, not a thing. Forest has an importance in terms of climate change resilience and in terms of job and livelihoods. But also, it's something that is a bit less. Forests are very important in terms of food security. 1/3 of the global population depend on forest goods and services. And in fact, in more than 20 developing countries, food security is improved because of the maintenance and cover. And forests cover the 4 dimensions of food security: food availability from the food you get to the forest, access to food, food utilization, and stability over time. This is a direct contribution of forests to food security. But there is an indirect one, which is the fact that trees sustain agriculture through various mechanisms and water regulation, pollination, pest control, and climate regulation. So not only forests provide and trees provide food, fruits, fodder, but they also provide ecosystem services that help agriculture. And then there is the whole question of the bioeconomy. Everyone says we need to reduce fossil fuel use, we need to use less concrete, we need to use less steel, and Bali place. I mean, people are using bamboo for construction, so I think. But if you use if you use 1 ton of wood instead of cement, you avoid 2.2 tons of CO2 emission, better thermal efficiency, and you reduce the material used by 15% compared to concrete. And this is an example of the highest wood skyscraper, 16-story building in Sweden. So we are now producing new type of wood like cross-laminated timber or that will allow you to build a large skyscraper. Then there is all issue of textile. I mean, it's sort of something that Indonesia knows very well. I mean, sort of we are producing something like now in 2020 something probably like 100 million tons of textile, and a lot of this textile is cotton, and cotton is very, very bad for the environment the way it is. But there is no fate in that. You can use wood-based textile that can be 9 times lower than synthetic one in terms of carbon emission. So wood and forest products have a very big role to play in the bioeconomy. But for that, we are facing another problem. Simply by increasing population, let's say that we will have about 900 million people additional in the world by 2030. Each of us consume about half a cubic meter of wood per year. That's whoever. So it's a bit an average per year. We are 8 billion people, and we produce and consume 4 billion cubic meter of timber, of wood. So it's half a cubic meter per year. You add 900 million people, then you need to get an additional 400 million cubic meter of wood per year. So where this wood is coming from? It should not come from the remnant untouched or protected forest. It's about 1 billion hectares. You can probably get a little more from the existing production forest, but not much more. So that means that the only place where you can grow more forest is on degraded land. Hence, you need to restore land, hence you need to have more forest to get more wood. And there's also that it now has been empirically proved that having forest and natural ecosystem next to you, or it improves well-being, to the point that the Japanese have invented a word on that, which is Shirin Yoku, for bathing. So wood is good for the environment, good for your health and your well-being. Now, if this is the case, what are the economics between the whole issue of forest restoration? First, look at the social cost and the liability. So if we say that we are losing about 12 million hectares per year, that's harming the timber, and that's 10% of the annual GDP, which is, in fact, if you look at the profile, $23 trillion will be lost to land degradation. So this is a mind-boggling number. But if we want to achieve success, we just need to invest about $5 trillion. It is a large number, but it's still lower than if we don't do anything. And if you look at the various initiatives, like the Bond Challenge, the initiative by 2020, the New York Declaration on Forest, the AFR 100, and then, so these are the value of the budget estimated in $1 billion. So these are a large number, but when you compare to the benefit, in fact, it will cost us much more if we don't do anything than if we try to restore. Now the question is, who is going to pay? As of today, if we take the example of the global funding, we have about 41 billion coming from a public fund, 10 billion from private funding, and we have a shortfall of 300 billion. So we need to find more money for restoration, and the question is where? So, and there is an economic case. I mean, a sort of half of the global GDP, 44 trillion, is threatened by nature loss. So there is really an economic case for restoration. Now, the only way we can find the funding for restoration, because it's not going to come from public fund, is through private funding. if you want to have funding from private sources, it needs to be an economic activity. So assuming that we are losing about $6.3 trillion per year to land degradation, there will be a benefit of between 0.7 to 9 trillion by achieving simply the bond challenge. And empirical evidence shows that if you invest $1 in restoration, you can get $7 to $30 in return. So there is a huge cost to society, and there are impressive returns. The question is why we are not doing it. And we are not doing it because we need a paradigm change in terms of forest restoration. What we have now is something like that. I mean, it's a very high cost per hectare of forest restore. There is very little financial return for the landowner. People are mostly looking at environmental benefits. These environmental benefits are perceived mostly by being non marketable, not internalized. They rely on public funding and top-down. So we need to move into something where research and development, the work that the university are doing or research center in terms lowering the cost, provide income to the landowner, whoever they are, and an industry that creates jobs, so that in fact it doesn't simply create environmental services, and so that something that provides goods and services to the society could be internalized, and where you need a mix of blended finance between the private and the public sector, and something that should be bottom up. Having a top-down decision, you want to restore a place, you don't have the agreement with the local people that degraded the place in first instance is not going to bring you very far. So, having said that, what are the few initiatives all over the world and in Asia? First, there is the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration that has been declared by the UN General Assembly in 2021. So it goes from 2021 to 2030. And the whole idea is to change the trajectory, and by 2030 to have net degradation zero, so no degradation anymore, and that involves the whole world. More close to us, we launched with FOCO C4 the Landscape Partnership Asia. That is for the ASEAN region, and the whole issue is really looking at create national dry forest. There is a lot of dry forest in Asia, I mean, both in Southeast and Central Asia, and it's largely neglected. and this is funded by AFOCO, the ASEAN Forest Cooperation Organization, C4 and ICRAF, and the Global Evergreening Alliance. So this is an initiative that was started 2 years ago. Yeah. And it's still getting traction, but if you are interested, you are still welcoming partners. Then there are other initiatives like the Landscape Restoration Transformative Partnership Platform. It is led by C4 ICRAF and a part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And its whole idea is to bring all people interested in the whole issue of degradation and working together, or initiative like carbon farming for resilient livelihood landscape, which is a project funded by AFOCO. So this. One of the best example of restoration is the South Korea example, and then we'll have our NIFOS people coming, but these are the hills around Seoul in 1960s. Overexploitation, the Korean War, and this is the result in 2020. And now in 2020, the main question that is facing by the forest department in Korea is, what are we going to do with all our forests? We have so much forest that and the society is more or less against the exploitation of forest. We want to keep forest, but they are reaching a stage where there's something like 70% of the land is covered in forest. So from this to there, it shows that it is possible. And if you look at the example of South Korea, it has been done at the same time of huge economic development. So maintaining your forest, restoration of land is not something that should stop your economic development, which is something that many people oppose. Oh, you are one of these green people, you want to put forest all over the place, but what about development? Look at South Korea. So what about Indonesia? In fact, if you look at the strategy to implement the NDC in Indonesia, that is created by the government and Minister Siti Nobaya, you see that a lot of it is about reducing deforestation, but also restoration, and it should be completed here beyond the peatland also by lately the restoration of 600,000 hectares of mangrove. So restoration is a big element in the implementation of the FOLU 2030 by the Indonesian government. And peatland is an important part, and it's something that fits into a lot of the sustainable goal. So it's international, national level, because you know that when there is a fire in peatland, you have transboundary haze, and our neighbor in Singapore are not very happy of that. The national FOLU net thing, the NDC, the peatland and mangrove restoration agenda, and even at the national. So it's one important effort that Indonesia is doing. And the whole background of it, I'm not going to read it, but I mean, a sort of, ultimately, I mean, a sort of, Indonesia has the largest share of peatland in Asia, I mean, a sort of about 22%. It's about 57 gigaton of carbon. And when there is a fire on this place, it creates a lot of emission, and ultimately, it costs you a lot of degradation in terms of loss, and also in terms of lost lives. So it is very important, and it is something that has been tackled well. This is an example of the few projects that C4 is doing with partner on the topic of peatland, issue of measurable action for S3 sustainable landscape, wetland ecomagena. So you will have the PowerPoint and that sort of. So anyone interested to participate or join, please, I mean, contact Imlal, and we'll put you in contact with partner. So there is a project on community-based approach to prevent and restore peatland that is led by Professor Ipornomo from IPB. And it is in Rio province, and this whole issue is instead of having a top-down, we are using community to restore peatland and try to prevent fire instead of fighting fire. So that's all. If some area blocking canals, plantation. So this one was planted in 2019, and the picture is 2022. So you see that we have some success. This is a project after the restoration, and this is where someone has hybrid coconut in home garden. So another issue is the bioenergy to restore degraded land, and Imlal is spearheading this one. It's the thing that we have degraded land in peatland, I think, and we have on the other side, Indonesia producing about 70% of its energy from coal. So how can you restore the degraded land so that you can produce biomass or other vegetable oil, so that you can shift the production from coal to biomass and energy? And we are enhancing this opportunity using climate agroforestry, and the whole idea is to produce, to restore land, to produce both livelihood and potential to create energy by biomass or biogas or biofuel, and increase livelihood. And it's led by Imlal in central Kalimantan using Nyamplung. I'm sure that here it's starting with the Pongamia. And also there is a project also led by Imlal, which is CORE, which is Sustainable Community-Based Reforestation Enterprise, with our NIFOS colleagues that work in South Sumatra on silvofishery models in terms of restoration. Another example of what is relevant for Indonesia is the whole issue of mangrove in coastal area, and that the question is, why is it so important? 60% of the world population live in coastal area, and 19 of the 29 world megacities are in coastal area, and a huge value of ecosystem services. And the fact is that Indonesia, which is one of the countries with the largest coastal area, I mean, it's sort of, they still have a large area of industry, but 1/3 of Indonesia coral reef are in poor condition. 80% expected to experience bleaching. 40% of Indonesia's seagrass cover have been lost, and the mangrove have been lost at about 1.1 to 1.8 million hectares of the 3.3 million hectares of mangrove are degraded. And Indonesia is 25% of the mangrove of the world. So there is an important issue in terms of both restoration and conservation. That's an interesting question that you have in the whole context of restoration. And it's true for, here is exemplified for mangrove, but it's true for any ecosystem. Is it better to conserve or is it better to restore? And if you look at mangrove, restoring 1 hectare of mangrove costs you about, bring you a return of about $30,000 and a cost that is higher than that. If you conserve 1 hectare of mangrove, it brings you a return of $80,000. So in fact, the benefit to cost ratio per hectare is 2.1 for restoration, but it's 14 to 1 for conservation. So one important point is this whole restoration agenda is that the first step is to conserve whatever can be conserved before it is degraded. Then when it is degraded and there is nothing much you can do naturally, then you can restore, but it's going to cost you more money and be more expensive. And these are some examples in other places. I'm not going to detail. Well, the take-home message, the global community recognizes the need to intensify restoration effort next to conservation. Restoration can make economic sense and be profitable, which is the reason why we need to involve the private sector. It requires significant investment that are currently lacking. That's again the sort of the case for bringing the private sector. It's also a long-term process. Everything that you see in the newspaper, I mean, a sort of planting tree campaign, is not very useful if you come back 1 year later and 98% of the trees are dead. So the point of restoration is not to plant trees. The point of restoration is not to grow trees, to make sure that stay there and they will deliver the environmental benefit and the economic benefit and the sustainable livelihood benefit that are expected 20 or 30 years from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Dr. Robert Desi for nice presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, now we move on to the discussion sessions. For offline participants in this room, could you please raise or address your question directly? And for those online participants in Webex room, could you please write your question in the chat room and we will read your question. Please, anyone have question? Yes, Pak Yan Ramona, please.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for the time given to me in order to ask some questions. I could see from your presentation that the rate of deforestation is very high and some effort has been done by before. I want to know so far to what extent the effort has been successful that has been done by when compared to the rate of deforestation and the effort to restore the forest, which one is higher? Is the rate of deforestation is much higher than the rate of rehabilitation? Lower than that. And the last one is there any effort to empowering people who live around the forest in order not to further destruct the forest? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not sure I got completely the, but what is happening now is, if you read the FAO state of the forest, I mean, that's sort of the rate of deforestation, net deforestation has decreased. So we were something in the region of net about 15 million hectares in the 90s, and then we are down to 5 million hectares. The problem is that it's a net on the global level. In the tropics, we are still at 10 to 12 million hectares deforested per year. So we are losing something like one soccer field of forest every minute. And whereas in the temperate area, there has been quite a lot of regrowth, be it secondary forest or plantation. That's the map I was showing you on the green and the red area. So we have something that is very much of concern, because the tropical forests are the ones that have mostly the higher biomass, the higher biodiversity, and have a very huge importance in terms of ecosystem services, in terms of carbon storage, in terms of climate regulation. So the answer to the question is that we are still losing an unacceptable amount of tropical forest, and there was some progress in temperate forest. Now, what's happening now with the new, the sort of this acceleration of climate change, with several million hectares of forest have been burned in Russia, something like that, we may even have a problem in temperate forest. So overall, we are losing more forest than we restore, much more. So that's why we are like the Red Queen, and we need to do more than that. In terms of the reason why forests are lost, as I said, 80% is linked to agriculture, both large-scale or small-scale agriculture. In some places like the Amazon, it was large-scale livestock production, or in the Cerrado, soybean. In the case of the DR Congo, it's mainly small-scale farmers that are making a living by cutting a little bit of forest and moving. In the case of Indonesia, it's a mix of both. I mean, it's both large-scale agricultural expansion and small-scale farming. So that, but what is important is to recognize first that we do need land for agriculture. I mean, you do need to feed people, and then you need to drink. But there is, first, we are wasting a lot of the food we produce, and 40%. So that means that we are producing probably more than enough to feed the people if we are reducing the waste. But that means, in terms of reforestation effort, that you need to convince the landowners. So if you have a top-down decision by the government, but ultimately you don't convince the landowner or provide an alternative, it is going to be very difficult to stop them doing what they are doing. So there is a big effort to do in terms of involving, and here I speak in terms of small-scale reforestation, involving the community, involving whoever is the landowner, involving the subnational government at the district level or the provincial level, in terms of creating alternative, in terms of providing incentive not to deforest. I mean, so the whole issue of incentive is something that is very important. The world is giving incentive up to some 700 billion per year to the agricultural sector that are in fact perverse for the forestry sector, and there is no reason for that. I mean, it could be changed.
Thank you very much for the answer. I think there is still behind a question: how successful is the C4 program for restoration of degraded land in Indonesia?
How successful? I mean, sort of. I mean, it's like with everything; it takes time. I mean, so we have been successful in having some change in regulation at the provincial level in Riau, for example, in terms of preventing fire against combating fire, so it has an impact on deforestation. we have been also colleagues from PB instrumental in the issue of the various regulation, the memorandum of, and the, I can't remember the name now, the permanent ban on logging and attributing concession in primary forest and in peatland. So ultimately, I mean, C4 is an international organization that do research and knowledge and working with partners on the ground. We can convince, or we can work with our colleagues at the policy level in convince them that they need to be changed, but ultimately we are not the one taking the decision. So if there is a success in terms of forest restoration in Indonesia, it's mainly the result of decision taken by the central level, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, or the BAPENAS, or others, and implemented on the ground. What science can do, I think it's providing the evidence base. Okay, if you do that, this is what is going to happen. If you do this, this is what is going to happen. We suggest you to do that, and then politics follow or don't follow.
Pak Yan, is that enough? Thanks a lot. Any more questions? Yeah, there's a question from online participant. This is from Ibu Eswaryanti actually. She's here. Why don't you ask directly then? Come on, Bu.
You know that there is two ways to answer your question. I mean, one is to ask Imlal and he will tell you about the Nyamplung, Pongami, and something. The other one is, I just remind you that Indonesia is using a large amount of palm oil for biodiesel. And this is a plant. This is a plant grown in degraded area, so you can say yes. There is at least one species that can be used at a large scale in terms of producing a biofuel is oil palm. Now, it's the one that we are trying to develop, I think it are different, but fundamentally it shows the things. You may ask the question, I mean, it's sort of something that necessarily environmentalists will like. It is about what is better? Having your energy production done by coal, which is highly polluting, or having your energy production mostly through biofuel, that create another problem in terms of land utilization, in terms of competition with food security and something like that. So that's really a balance to have, but ultimately things have to change if we want to. Imlal, you want to add?
Yeah, no. Thank you. Just what mentions with some in addition to that, so what we are trying. So I will also add a little bit of previous question also. What is our success, and we can go from there. So we are as a research organization we develop the models like so farmers go to community groups, farmers they ask, "Oh, what can I grow in my land? So when they see the forest, what can I grow here? Grow, so we can tell what tree can grow here, so I can give the list of trees, and they will ask, okay, oh, how much money I can make out of this, so is it profitable or not, so how long it will take, okay, is it profitable for 20 years or it is profitable in 5 years, so these kind of questions they are. So what we are showing is now with C4 eCraft database and model and tools, we have, okay, if you have the land in which part of the landscape, so what can be grown and what are the potential benefits, values, that kind of database we are creating. So these are available in graph website, some are in Sipur website. We are developing these kind of models and tools for restoration. So we are researching, we don't do the large scale restoration by ourselves. But what we demonstrate is we demonstrate small scale restoration with Namplung or Pongamia or Komirisunan. Now industries, big companies are coming to plant. So we show 5 hectare, 10 hectare, and they like, they see, because they don't have to invest their money to do the research. So from that they get the knowledge, and we publish everything like publicly. So what we call global public good. So our publications are open access. So they find it, and they plant now for I heard like many companies now already started 2,000, 5,000 hectare of or small scale demonstration. Some companies are coming, so we want to plant 20,000, 50,000 hectare of Pongamia pinnata. So I also need to put in touch with Buat. So that's the thing. Like our success is that develop something successful so that people will scale up or scale out. That's the one. In terms of biofuel, so we are working on two aspects. One is producing biomass that can be generate the electricity. What we receive almost 70% of electricity is coming from coal, which is coming from like West Kalimantan. They transport that several days to NTT or like different islands and to burn it. So that's the one way. Another way, there is a lot of land that is not utilized, what is either degraded or underutilized, less that we can use. Using agroforestry system, you can grow more biomass on that, so people get job. And this biomass can be converted to electricity. That we are working with companies. That's called, sometimes that can be completely replaced with biomass, and other called co-firing. So they can use biomass and also the coal like. That is one way. Another way is producing the seed oil like Pongamia pinnata is also behind in the campus. Flour and protein. Another species called Namplung. What we call Bali is they call Champlung, Calophyllum inophyllum. So in the coast, the seeds full of oil which can be converted to biofuel. So we are demonstrating those kind of successful cases to various locations.
Thank you, Mr. Himlal, for your nice addition explanations. Ladies and gentlemen, next question, Bu Parma, please.
Thank you, Ibu Pertiwi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Parma. In one of your presentation, you mentioned about coastal conservation. I'm working on genetic diversity of seagrass, and I found that here in Bali, the genetic diversity is quite low. Could you please elaborate more on what does before have been done in this coastal conservation or restoration? Because mainly, as far as I know, it's on terrestrial or wetland. Thank you.
No, we are not working on seagrass directly. I mean, but we have a large program on mangroves. So that's where we are the most active in terms of the blue carbon and the blue carbon ecosystem. While recognizing the importance of seagrass, or things, we are mostly working on mangroves through a global project which is called SWAMP, Sustainable Wetland Management and Protection, by Professor Daniel Modiarso. That cover mangrove all over the globe, and then we have some mangrove project in South Sumatra, funded by Temasek Foundation in Singapore, where it's community-based mangrove, and Himlal is starting something with Jeju, Korea. So it's mostly mangrove, not seagrass. I mean,
Unfortunately, C4 doesn't do the seagrass. Any more questions, please? Yes, please, Pak Job.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nezi, I used to contact with isolated tribe when I was in Middle Sumatra. My father worked as a oil company, and my question is, how important is the indigenous community who live in forests for restoring or conservation the forest? Because we still have many in Indonesia. We have suku Dayak, we have suku Sakai, suku Mante in Aceh, suku Kubu in Sumatra, and suku Baduy in Java, for instance. How important they are for restoration or conservation the forest?
The short answer is that indigenous people are critical for the conservation. I think empirical evidence show that land that are under management of all the property or the rights of indigenous people have less deforestation and less degradation than land that are outside of this. And land managed by indigenous people are less deforested than even national parks. So these people are very important, and they were recognized in the last COP in Glasgow, where in fact a lot of the donors say that we are going to put $2.7 billion for local people, indigenous people. The problem that we are facing is that even when these people have the rights, when technically they have the right, they don't have the capacity to implement this right because there is a power imbalance, and a big company will come, and so there is not an even negotiation. I mean, I remember a long time ago, and we were doing some work in C4 in East Kalimantan, and people will tell you, oh, that this forest, that forest is our most important thing. So we were doing the mapping, and a couple of months later, a big company came and they said, okay, we are giving you this amount of money to thing, and people will sell the forest because what they want is, they like the forest, but they want hospital, they want health facility for their children, they want school, they want development. So that's why it is important to, indigenous people are very important to first avoid degradation and then conserve the forest because they have a vested interest in the forest, they are living there. But unless we provide them with the condition where they can exercise their rights, they can get the benefit from their forest or from the product they came from, they are unlikely to be able to keep it. So very important, and so far they don't really have the right or the capacity to manage their forest. In some place, I mean, so in my own country, France, the government doesn't recognize indigenous people. They say, oh, everybody is French. Yeah, it's a bit different.
Any more questions, please? Yes, please, students.
Okay, thank you. My name is Michelle, student of biology. I want to ask, since the restoration needs a lot of cost to prepare anything, why the restoration cost is cheaper than the conservation cost?
No, restoration is more expensive than conservation. So the thing is that the ratio of cost benefit is much better in the conservation case than restoration. It's always cheaper when you have to do nothing. So if you stay and then nothing and then you keep your forest, it doesn't cost you anything. If you destroy your forest and you have to plant it, then it costs you a lot of money. So it's the cost of, there are two things. The cost of inaction when you conserve forest is cheaper than the cost of restoration. The cost of inaction when you let forest be degraded is much higher than the cost of things. So that's the whole issue. We need to invest. So it's these things, I mean, it's sort of, if we don't fix the issue of climate change now, it's going to be more and more expensive to fix it. And 10 years or 20 years ago, it would have been much cheaper, but we didn't do anything. And so it's getting more and more expensive, and because it's getting more and more expensive, people are doing less and less, and it's getting more and more expensive. So it's really a vicious circle, Minnesota. And unless we break this vicious circle, we are going to head with not 1.5, but 3 degrees temperature increase, and we are going to have serious problems. So the cost of conservation is always cheaper than the cost of restoration. It's the same. If you maintain your house regularly, cost you, but it costs you less than if you let it run down for 25 years and try to fix it everything at the last minute.
If I have two questions actually. Indonesian government use palm oil for biodiesel feedstock, while we know that palm oil is edible. Do you think is it sustainable in terms of food security? That's my first question. My second question, 80% of deforestation is driven by agriculture, while agriculture sector is very important to feed 9 billion of world populations. So how to compromise between reforestation and agricultural system? Thank you.
Palm oil. I don't have any definitive answer for that. I mean, a sort of Indonesia is the largest producer of palm oil, and Indonesia and Malaysia, the two together, it's 75 or 80% of the oil palm in palm oil in the world. I mean, a sort of, and if you take the example of Europe, a lot of the oil palm that is imported by Europe is for bioenergy and cosmetics. The government decided a couple of years ago to go to the B30, biodiesel 30%, and now they want to move to B50 and B100. And people have said that the big increase on the cost of cooking oil recently was because of that. Not sure. I think there is a lot of speculation, a lot of people making stocks and trying to sell. So it's very difficult to give you an answer. I think that it's possible to use oil palm as a biodiesel. In some cases, it's probably better than to burn coal or to bring fuel on thousands of kilometers for that. To which extent it is going to be able to maintain the value of oil palm for food and in terms of bioenergy, this is something that for which the jury is still out, so we are not sure. At this stage, it's still very much an experiment. But of course, I mean, it will have to be monitored very carefully because the situation can swap from one place to the other, and then you end up with crisis. I mean, increase in price or scarcities or something like that. Still, Indonesia has the capacity to say, okay, I mean, if we are using all our oil palm, we don't sell it to Europe. This works only with the private company if the local price is the same as the export price. So one of the issues is that the price fixed in Indonesia is much cheaper than the price where you can sell anything, and people are looking for profit, so they will try to sell. So there is a lot of complexity in that, but there is nothing inherently wrong with the idea, or let's use oil palm as a biodiesel. In terms of agriculture, the main issue is that you have a lot of people that tell you, by 2030 we'll have 10 million people, and we need to feed these people, and to feed these people we need to have more productive agriculture, and more agriculture, more food production. No, I don't think it's true. I think we are producing enough food now to feed 10 billion people. The problem is that the food is not necessarily produced where you need it, so there is a lot of waste in the developing country, Western Europe, US, we are wasting something like 40% of the food post-production. So we are throwing away 50% of the 40% of the food, and in country in the tropics, we are losing 40% of the food before production, so because of pest and disease, improper storage. So we are wasting a huge amount of food. If waste was a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emission. So you will have US, China, and West. So unless we reduce this issue of waste, both post-consumption or post-production, then of course we don't have enough food. If we reduce that, then we have enough food. We don't need to cut more forests to produce food.
Thank you very much for your nice explanation. Ladies and gentlemen, is there any more questions? Yes, please, Pak Yan.
Check. Thank you very much. There is a restore the destructed forest. I wonder how you get the fund in order to manage this. Is it from United Nations or elsewhere? Thank you.
That's the whole issue in terms of, okay, if nature-based solution, restoration, conservation, that people consider that it can solve about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions, about 37%. But it receives only 3% of the funding. So the question is, how do you shift that so that there is more funding that goes to nature-based solution, conservation, and public funding has its limit. There is so much that the government can invest in that, because they also have to pay for health, for other things. So it's the reason why the private sector is important. And you see now quite a lot of private sector companies that invest in restoration. The problem is that they invest for all the wrong reasons. So when you have a big oil company that say, oh, I'm going to plant 1 billion trees, they are going to plant 1 billion trees so that they can keep on extracting oil, which is not the purpose. So you need to reduce your oil extraction and then plant to offset. So, but they are investing in that more. More seriously, it's a question of where the world puts its priorities. The Green Climate Fund, which is the largest fund in terms of fighting climate change, it's a $10 billion per year, a huge amount of money. Then, in terms of what we need to restore, and it's about 300 billion. It's quite a huge amount of money also. Then you have to compare that to something which is a bit. The world, the United States only is spending something like 50 or 60 billion dollars on pet food. So you have to see what is your priority. Is it to save the climate, or is it to feed your pets? And more importantly, I mean, it's another magnitude. The world is spending 1.3 trillion dollars in weapons. So where the priority should be, I mean, is it to develop weapons to kill ourselves happily, or is it to fight the climate and try to survive? And that's a matter of where the priority are. So it's not that the money is missing. It's invested in the wrong places. And so the job that we are doing, and that I guess university, it's to try to convince the government that money invested in restoration, or money invested in conserving nature, money invested of giving indigenous people rights, is better invested than money invested in pet food or in producing weapons.
Thank you very much. Is that enough, Pak Yan? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, maybe some more questions from online participant, please. I'm sorry, I would like to mention my students who have to write a resume from this guest lecture. For Yulia, Amara, Flavia, Asri, and Fiorenza in the WebEx room. Do you have any questions? Is Amara here? Sorry, I can't see you because you are wearing mask. Do you have questions? Yes, please, Ibu Dek.
Thank you, Pak Robert. So actually, related to last question that Pak Ian asked you, in terms of plantation of palm oil in huge area of Sumatra and Kalimantan, do you take account of that as well when talking about restoration, or just excluded it? So how did you say that that's gonna be important for our climate, I mean, helping the climate change or even destroying the climate change? You're not counting it. That's the first one. The second one is, if it's not counted, so how would we, in this case, would approach the government to say to the government that it's not right, but the government actually need it, as you said, for income for all of us in Indonesia. That's a bit, I think, contradictory thinking of us, me particularly. If we don't plant the palm oil, we need the money to feed our community. But if we plant it, we actually destroying the natural environment that we have, and it's already done and being done. I think still in Indonesia. What do you think about that?
Tell the same thing that I said. There was a webinar on oil palm and the sustainability of the trade. Palm oil is a very divisive issue. I mean, it's sort of, for some people it's the best product on earth. From other people it's the worst one. I mean, and I think like if you, like the truth is probably in between. So if you are cutting primary forest to plant palm oil, I think it's not a good thing and not something that should be encouraged. On the other side, I mean, there is a lot of degraded land in Indonesia that stays idle and that burns every year and doesn't bring any benefit. This land could be planted with oil palm or other commodity so that it's not simply wasted land that burns every year. So that's sort of one point. I mean, then the other point is that something that C4 is working, C4 is working, is you don't need to have monoculture of oil palm. You can grow oil palm in agroforestry system. You produce the same amount of oil, but then at the same time you produce fruits, vegetable, and you increase the resilience of the people. So that's something that we are experimenting on large scale in Brazil with Amazon, the Jeff Bezos Amazon, not the Amazon forest. And that's something that could be done in Indonesia. I mean, sort of, you don't need to have this huge amount of monoculture of palm oil with a lot of fertilizers. You can have people having agroforestry system based on oil palm. And that will change completely the dynamics. So if you are starting from a place that is totally degraded and you end up with an agroforestry system based on oil palm, I think it's restoration. I mean, some of the green environmentalists may not like it, but I think in terms of carbon storage, in terms of ecosystem services, it is restoration. If you are starting from a primary forest and you end up with an oil palm plantation, monoculture, that's degradation in terms of carbon, in terms of ecosystem services. So this whole issue, I mean, it's a very divisive issue, and oil palm is a very important one. But I mean, the product itself is a good product. If you want to replace palm oil by vegetable oil, you need much more area because the oil palm is the one that produces the most. And there is nothing that stops developing agroforestry system based on oil palm, but with other plants. on degraded land. So I think that's where, for me, the future really lies.
Thank you very much.
Actually, this information is very important for us as a teacher as well as for the student. Actually, how we encourage the people and the way we think that the restoration is much more important than planting the palm oil or changing that mindset. So, more spreading the information that even though the benefit of palm oil that is being produced, but the restoration with the all benefits that we might have much more beneficial than the one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for Ibu Dekan. Ladies and gentlemen, last question is from Puspa. Thanks.
Thank you, Ibu Arpiwi. I want to ask a question like how CIFOR are going to face the land restoration challenge. Like one of them is when the human population are always increasing and the need of land for living is always be there, and it could affect the available of land space of restoration. So how does CIFOR will deal with it?
You are putting a lot of confidence in C4 is a small organization. Just to give you an idea, how many students you have here? 30,000? 30,000. C4 is a 190 people organization. 190. So it's by far less than Udayana. So I can tell you the question, what is Udayana going to do in terms of... So we have to be very modest in terms of what we can do. And there is something that is happening now is that in many places, I mean, the population is not increasing. It's just getting old. Japan, Korea, Italy, there is less people, and there will be even China, there will be a decrease in population. We will reach a peak, and then there will be a decrease in population, and the question is, how are we going to deal with that? So that's one. And then if you take all the people of the world, the sort of the 8 billion people, and if you give them let's say 100 square meter for them, in fact you can put them in one country. So there is still a lot of space in the world. I think the whole issue in terms of land degradation, it's because there is a tendency in our system to put immediate profits first against long-term benefits. And that's something where an organization like C4 or where universities need to show society, we need to show decision maker that maybe you have to forego a certain amount of immediate profit for the long-term benefit of everybody else. Again, I mean, sort of what we do is we provide solutions, we provide ideas. We are not the society or we are not the government who decides to follow or don't follow. But ultimately, the big problem that will be faced in 50 years from now, let's say, is the issue of depopulation in some part of the world, overpopulation in another one, sort of, and how we are going to deal with that in the climate change context. I mean, knowing that some place on Earth will be not livable, but on the other side, some areas that are now covered in ice will be open. So there is going to be and I will probably not be there to see that, but you are still young enough to see that. You will have to deal with migration, with low population, aging population in many places. So it's not going to be an easy world that we will leave to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the closing session. I think that's all for the guest lecture. We thanks Dr. Robert Nasi and Dr. Himlal Baral for nice presentations and discussions. And thanks to all participants. I hand in the time to the Master of Ceremony, Puspa. Thanks.
Thank you, Ibu Arpiwi, as a moderator, and also our great speaker, Dr. Robert Nasi. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are now arriving at the end of our guest lecture today. We would like to give thank you very much to the speaker for the time and efforts devoted in knowledge and experiences sharing to all of us here today. I believe so many information and knowledge have been picked by all of us from this guest lecture. Once again, and on behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to say thank you for all the attendees here today, and we do apologize should there be any mistake that we were done or said during this commencement of this event. We hope to see you all again in our next event. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. And for the students, I mean, I haven't had the time to do it, but I will prepare a list of the various literature reference so that you can have some happy reading when you have some time.
Photo sessions, please. Please come up to the front for photo session.
Biasa online sih. Iya.
Silakan Bapak Ibu mahasiswa foto bersama.
Oh, hilang. Hilang ya. Kak lagi saya. Harus dulu.